So this is Gala King, my daughter, and my name's Gary King. And if there's any vets for peace here, I was a conscientious objector back in that bad war in Vietnam. Gala and I have been on a medical mission to the Philippines about 10 years ago, helping some doctors and nurses do surgery. That was to Guatemala, okay? So then she's with a group called what? Interfaith?
Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity.
For Human Integrity, and it's muchly in California and Nevada, and the churches there are really cohesive on this because they have a big border problem. They have many deportations and all that. So we have other literature back there about the sanctuary movement, things like that. But they were planning a trip to Honduras. Normally, this group takes about 20 people, interfaith religious leaders, sort of, to Honduras. And people kept signing up. So we wound up taking 70 people.
Wow.
And although it says interfaith, I am not exactly what you call a religious person, but they let me come anyway. And a little bit of that is that I do a lot of work with Amnesty International. So since 1976, although my work there is mostly on the Philippines, because my wife gave us mothers from the Philippines. So I've been there 30 times, and we got lots of killings and murders and disappearances to worry about there. So actually what I saw in Honduras isn't any different than the Philippines, I'm afraid. And the U.S. is screwing that one up too. We went, 70 people went, and it was a one-week tour. It was a fact-finding tour. You could call it a reverse caravan because we're there to learn why are they all fleeing for their lives to come to America. So Gala will be able to fill you in on what we saw and did with that. Now tonight we have, thanks to Kristen here at WHAM, she has produced a whole bunch of these postcards, and there's 6 colors and 6 targets. 2 of our reps have already signed a wonderful bill called the Berta Cáceres Bill for Human Rights in Honduras. And this is a long-standing bill in the House. It's got 61 co-sponsors right now. And both Omar and Betty McCollum have already co-sponsored it. Those postcards say thank you. Mm-hmm. And the other 2 are for Angie Craig and Dean Phillips because they haven't co-sponsored yet. And then the other 2 are for our senators. There's no equivalent bill in the Senate. So this is saying, would you please get that House bill and write it up for the Senate and get it going. So we have 6 of these, and we welcome you to sign these, and if you want to throw in $1 for the postage, that would be good too. These things point out 2 things. Last week, literally, last week and the week before, there were protesters protesting the privatization of health care and education. This is a bill coming out of the Honduran government, and it's absolutely horrible for the poorer people. So many people, thousands literally, were protesting, and they were met with tear gas, and I think there were even some deaths involved. So the first part of this postcard says, what about this recent spate of violence that's going on in Honduras? Would you please address that? So I would say, pick one for your rep, hit the 2 senators, and feel free to sign a lot of these, and or take some to your friends if they will. How much does this cost?
34 cents.
34? Yeah. 34 cents to mail this, so $1 gives you almost 3 of them. You can take some along for your friends. Mm-hmm. And we have 2 more talks after tonight. We have 2 on Wednesday at People of Faith Peacemakers and Wednesday evening in St. Paul. So we'll obviously have the same thing for there. And those, if you know anybody else that wants to hear this story, there's a flyer back there that'll give them the address of where to come to those 2 talks. So I live here in Minnesota, so I'm planning to continue work. We'll probably, in our Amnesty chapter, it's the big one in Minnesota, we'll probably have a subgroup working on Honduras. And it's pretty easy to do. We just get a few of the members, and monthly we do things. But I truly want to meet people from Hands Off Honduras and other the support groups. I want to meet you. There's a sign-up sheet back there. So please sign, and or if you want to, we'll swap phone numbers. I really do want to meet you, maybe come to your meetings, and maybe we'll see what can we do together. Okay, so I think Gail's ready. Yes, and I trust her implicitly with all this. So, Gala King.
Dad. I wonder if is it possible to turn these lights down a little bit? Kristen?
turn 'em off.
Is that, or at least in the front so that you can see the slides.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for being here tonight, joining my dad and myself to hear more about Honduras. As my dad mentioned, I'm also new to this country, new to the Honduran country. I was with my dad with this delegation in March, and the organization I work with is one of the groups that was organizing the delegation. So, and I know many of you have been, who has been to Honduras in the crowd today? So some of you have been there too. So I do look forward to just sort of having a conversation with others that are also committed to Honduran solidarity. Is it okay if I stand here so I can access the slides? This is good. Okay. So the organization I'm with, Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, we are a statewide organization in California, which is where I live. And we have two core programs. One of them is immigrant justice, where we engage the faith community in the Northern California, which is where I live, as well as the Inland Valley, which is in the central part of California. So we engage the faith community to be in solidarity with immigrants and those that are newly arrived seeking asylum. We also have a program in Los Angeles, Justice Not Jails, where we are working to end mass incarceration and mass criminalization of people of color. And we very much see how these issues are linked and intertwined. So my role with Interfaith Movement is their Northern California faith community organizer. And some of our values and our approaches to the work is in addressing root causes. As we we engage the faith community to support newly arrived immigrants in the Bay Area, we know that unless we address the root causes of why people are fleeing, we're just going to be continuing to not be getting at the source of the issue. So that's something that we think is really important. At the same time, we know that we have to strengthen communities in the United States that immigrants are trying to settle and trying to flee to, and the Bay Area is one of the top destinations, especially for those that are coming up through our central border, our southern border, because of our court systems, because of our legal services that are available there. And so we engage faith communities on the far left in sort of these four ways in accompaniment, and I know that faith churches here are doing the same thing. I've been hearing about St. Joan of Arc, Welcome the Stranger. Other folks are doing that with immigrants. So we form teams, accompaniment teams in different faith communities and partner them with a family or an individual to help walk with them while they're settling here. We also have what we call housing hospitality, which is supporting newly arrived immigrants in finding housing, sometimes housing them in our churches or in homes, or subsidizing rent, since that's a huge issue. And then we have deportation defense, as people are facing deportation. Maybe they've been here for many, many years and are caught up in the legal system. We develop campaigns to defend them from deportation. And then advocacy. And the advocacy piece is so important on so many different levels. Local advocacy, how are we strengthening our sanctuary cities? State level advocacy, what can we do to strengthen our state system, especially when we see what's happening federally? And then international advocacy, which is where our Honduras work falls. So I wanted you to kind of get a sense of where our approach to the work and why we found ourselves in Honduras in March. So we also wanted, as my dad mentioned, this was an interfaith delegation, and we used this framework of pilgrimage when we invited people to join us as a way to differentiate ourselves from a tourism trip, from even just pure advocacy trip or research. We really wanted the folks to be open to sort of a deep spiritual or faith experience, if that was a part of who they were. So we use this framework of pilgrimage with our delegation. And now we're sort of in the fourth stage of pilgrimage, which is your return. When you go on a pilgrimage, at the end you're returning and you have a commitment to make to the people that you were pilgriming with. And so this is a part of what I see as our return promise. So this is our delegation. As my dad mentioned, we had nearly 75 people. The three core organizations that organized this delegation was the group I work with, Interfaith Movement, along with Share El Salvador, which does solidarity work with El Salvador, based in Northern California, and then Sisters of Mercy, which is a national group. But we also had some organizers from CARAVAN, Los Angeles, the Central American Resource Center. We had some Unitarian Universalist Social Action Team members, students from University of San Francisco. A lot of Catholic sisters were there, and other human rights advocates like my dad. So it was a pretty diverse group. And so Honduras, and I think everyone in the room knows where Honduras is, but it was important for us to remind ourselves just the location in relation to the United States, because the communities we were visiting who were really fighting and resisting to stay, many of them who have to make the choice to leave, do this incredibly long journey through Mexico to our southern border. So the country is about the size of Ohio, very rich in biodiversity with the rivers and mountains and natural resources. This is one reason why there's so much interest from corporations and transnational entities to get at the richness. A lot of indigenous, or 9 distinct indigenous groups, and we did get a chance to meet with some leaders from the Afro-Indigenous group, the Garifuna, who are being displaced due to tourism. And the population is around 9 million, although our partners were saying around 2 million are currently living outside of Honduras. We also know that the US and Honduras relationship is very long, and so we think about the ways in which the US has been intervening economically in Honduras since 1850, and with different economic interests, whether it was with the canal, mining, which exists today, the big fruit companies and plantations, with the clothing sweatshops, the maquiladoras, and now, and some of the things that we witnessed more of was the palm oil industry, the mining, the tourism, and the hydroelectric power industry. In addition to the economic interests, the U.S. has had a long military and political interest in Honduras. Many really cite the 2009 coup as being one of the recent events in history that has led to the current crisis that the Honduran people are experiencing. And the U.S. has sort of played a role in supporting the current regime, which many of our partners believe was completely fraudulently elected, and our support of the ongoing military and militarized police in Honduras. So the conditions in Honduras today, we really see how it is a result of this U.S. involvement of 150 years. Now, there's a lot of poverty, extreme poverty. 68% live in poverty. And many of the people feel insecure economically and physically, which is why they're fleeing at the rate of 9,000 a month or 300 a day. Mostly trying to get to the U.S., but also just going to other countries. They have a huge income inequality and really high spending in the military. And as this young girl that we saw in one of our demonstrations is reminding us, she's holding that picture of Berta Cáceres. It's a very dangerous place to be if you're a human rights or land defender. One of the things that we also witnessed and wanted to talk with US-based audiences is just the idea of criminality and impunity in Honduras and the long history of that. Right now, I think when you look at the news, the thing that really jumps out about Honduras are the gangs. There's a lot of stories and a lot of articles that talk about the gangs, which are wreaking havoc on the people. At the same time, we want folks to really think about that they're not the only form of criminality and impunity, and the reasons why they're able to continue is because of this, is because of the state that is also using violence to quell repression and sometimes working and colluding with the gangs with impunity. And the role of corporations, we want to lift that up as well. I have a picture of the Chiquita banana, but their long history in Honduras extracting resources, using violence to oppress the people, and also colluding with the state and gangs. So we definitely wanted this for folks to think about this as well when we think of the caravan and who's arriving and why they're arriving. I wanted to just share one story of a local Honduran who's now in San Francisco. This young woman, Cindy Flores. This is a picture of her and her 2 kids, and she actually has an opinion in the New York Times that you should look up. But Cindy did flee Honduras. Their family was directly impacted by gang violence, and she left Honduras with her 3 children and her boyfriend. And as they made that journey through Mexico, in Mexico they were attacked by Mexican officials, and so their family was separated. So the father took the little baby and ran in one direction, and then Cindy grabbed the 2 older ones and went in another direction. So by the time she got to the border with her older kids, she found out and heard through people at the detention center that she ended up in, that when her husband presented at the border with the baby, they separated them, which we know was happening, and he fought back because that was his child. So the baby was sent somewhere, and he was held in detention. And so Cindy made it to San Francisco and was wanting to know where was her baby. And she tried to ask as many questions and find out, and wasn't getting any answers. Eventually she got in touch with the San Francisco Chronicle, which is one of our big media outlets who supported her in investigating. And finally the government responded and said, okay, we can tell you where your baby is. You have to pay us $3,000 to pay for the airfare for us to bring her to you. And finally she pushed back, and they agreed to just bring her baby. So she was reunited, and so now she's out speaking out against her experience. And when we talked to her about the gangs, because that was the reason she fled, we said, well, Cindy, in Honduras, was there any problems before the gangs? And she just looked at us. She said, of course. The problems in Honduras began with Christopher Columbus. And so she really, has this great understanding of the history of her country. And I just encourage you to look up her opinion piece, because she has a really strong opinion. So now she's sort of speaking out, and her big concern is the trauma that her children experienced and continue to experience. I mean, when she was reunited with her baby, she was thin, really ill, and just completely traumatized. So luckily they're getting some family therapy. So, our delegation, this was the organization Radio Progresa, and Eric was a community host in Honduras. Radio Progreso is a community radio station that's been operating for 60 years, really broadcasting the stories of the people. Padre Melo, who's a Jesuit priest, he's up in the corner on the right in the pink shirt. He's been a leader of this organization for a long time. He's very outspoken and critical of the government. His life is under constant threat. The radio station there you see is behind kind of barbed wire and security, which is what they have to do to continue to do their important work. So they've been in the organization that I belong to, as well as this other group, Share El Salvador, has been in a relationship with Radio Progreso for many years. So we've hosted Padre Melo here in the US for him to speak, and then he's invited us down. So our delegation was really at an invitation from him. And his, request, because he really sees how an international presence and an international just view on Honduras really helps shift things for them locally. So that was a big part of why he wanted this delegation, and actually why he welcomed such a big delegation. And I'll say more at the end, but we are hoping to bring Radio Progreso, Padre Melo, and a few others here to do a speaking tour in the US, and we would love for them to come to the Twin Cities. So our large group of 75 was then broken up into 3 smaller groups so that we could each see and meet with different communities and just see the different types of experiences that, things that people were going through. The group, my dad and I went to Bajo Aguan, which is up there. Another group just stayed in San Pedro Sula, and one went to Santa Barbara, and then we all at one point converged on the capital in Tegucigalpa. So I'll share a few stories from those different areas. So Santa Barbara, this, is it a little fuzzy? This is the bridge to a local community in Santa Barbara called La Presa. And it's hard to see, but at the end of the bridge, there's community members waiting. There's about 80 people that welcomed our delegation. This is the only way to get to the community, is this very precarious bridge. They are deeply concerned about a hydroelectric power plant, which is being planned to be built by a Taiwanese company. When it goes through, it would completely flood this community, and it would displace the 80 families that currently live there. So they really wanted us to see what they're living and really fighting for, is their own survival. So they welcomed our delegation and really invited people to just be with them in community. So our delegates were able to spend the night. They were just sent to different houses there in La Presa. They were invited to go to the school, to meet with the children, and just to sort of witness how they're living and thriving and what they're up against. There was a health clinic that they also wanted to show our delegation. So there was a building, as you can see, which had some things, but other than that, pretty just empty of any supplies. And they were sharing that this was a project in collaboration with the U.S. government and the Ministry of Health in Honduras. So money got there to build the clinic, but then that was it. So it sort of lays neglected, empty, and the community has to travel an hour and a half for health care. So they were very much wanting to show like this government neglect and corruption, as well as sort of the different ways that they're dealing with the U.S. influence. The main employer in that area was the sugarcane plantation owned by Dole, and they were told that in that community the jobs are really only for some of the younger people. Even though there was a lot of really healthy, strong, older people, they said they won't employ them because they're more likely to organize and know about their rights. So they really, unemployment was a huge issue for them. And just the solidarity that we were given as well as received was really, really powerful to witness everywhere we went. So this other region, Bajo Aguan, this is where my dad and I went. It's in sort of the northeastern part of Honduras. The Aguan, River Aguan, it's a very resource-rich part, very fertile. It's also one of the most highly militarized parts of the country because of that. This is a picture of a palm oil plantation that we drove by. We were visiting specifically the Guapinol community. There's a river that runs through this area, the Guapinol River, that provides water for about 40,000 people. And when we arrived, they had just come out of this 90-day-long nonviolent peaceful resistance, where a mining company has been setting their sights on land right in their community. And so part of the way that they resisted was they built an encampment, and they just occupied their land for 90 days. But it ended in October when 1,500 police and military forcibly removed people with tear gas. People died. And there was also a whole criminalization of the community leaders. So when we arrived and we met and heard from the community, right here is Juan Lopez and Dalila, who are community leaders. Juan was facing criminal charges. They charged 13 of their community leaders with organized crime, with land usurpation, with land destruction. You know, this is a tactic that they're using, and so the people went into hiding originally and then came forward with legal support. They were arrested and incarcerated for 2 weeks, and eventually the charges were dropped. But Juan doesn't feel safe going home. He still doesn't live at home right now because he just knows that they're still out to get him. So when we were there to visit them, they took us to their river, their Guapino River, which they were so really wanting us to get in the river, just to be there and to be present and to feel this beautiful source of life for them. So we were able to get our feet in the river, and Matias, who is one of the organizers, did this wonderful blessing of the river, and there was about 100 community members with their delegation. And right when that ended, this military battalion shows up on the other side of the river, just fully armed and like they're in a war zone. And the community wanted us to see this because this is their daily reality. They're not allowed to access this river before a certain time because the military is patrolling that area, because right on the other side is the road that the mining company is constructing to go up to the mines. So they've been preventing the community from accessing the river. So when we were there, we got really intense. The community got really big and was just yelling at this military group. And you know, we as the delegates, we were like, okay, we need all of our white delegates to move to the front so that they can see whiteness, you know, and which people did, which was really wonderful. And eventually, after 20 minutes, the military just took photos and then they left. And then within hours, the mining company put out a communication on social media, which you see photos of our group and pointing out with these mug shots of the community leaders, and just sort of saying they've been spotted at the Guapino River, and this is just sort of their daily reality. So we were, for better or worse, able to witness what they go through on a daily basis. So in addition to meeting with the community, in Guapino, they really wanted us to meet with the local officials and government folks. So some who they had been trying to meet with, like the local mayor. Part of our group met with the local police, the military. My dad and I got to meet with this governor of their state of Colón. And when we walked in, the thing that really struck us was that he had an Israeli flag behind him. There wasn't a Honduran flag, or even US, but it was an Israeli flag, because we had also been hearing about Israel's weapons that are getting into the hands of Hondurans. And when our delegation tried to ask him about what is the flag, what's the significance of this, his response was, well, this is a symbol of the people of God, which was really interesting. And so the rabbi in our group, sort of her jaw dropped open, like, what is this? But the presence of the military in that region is it's everywhere, and that's what we also witnessed. And it was interesting to meet with him and to hear his thoughts on the presence of the military, because in Honduran, what our community partners were telling us in the Honduran Constitution, the military is only to be deployed in times of national sovereignty. So when we pressed him on, well, why is it operating in this community, Guapino, his response was, well, it's really there to keep the peace, that, campesinos, the farmers, are fighting amongst each other for the land. In this region, there's the most deaths of campesinos recently, or since the coup. Over 100 have been killed, so we asked about that, and he really made it sound like they're killing each other. And that the government's role is really trying to mediate. So that was sort of the line that he had. But we were in that meeting with one of the other community leaders who really pushed back on that, on his rhetoric. So it was eye-opening for us to witness that.
And insert something here. I asked him, what happens to the Hondurans deported from America? Because the U.S. gets a plane load of them and drops them off at their Tegucigalpa or San Pedro Sula airport. And he says, well, first we got to ask them why they left. Because we got to find out whether they're enemies of the president and the government and what their politics is. And then he said, well, they could owe debts. They might owe money to people, and if they have any assets, we're going to help get those assets to go to the people that loaned them money. And of course, when you think about it, a single male Honduran with $9,000 can get with a coyote and he'll bring him up through the desert and he'll make it into America, generally. If you have a family with children, it's only $6,000. Because they get you somewhat safely up to the U.S. border, and then they drop you off in front of the port of entry and they say, okay, go in there and ask for asylum. So their job's done, just to get you up to the border. So here are these campesinos, they got to come up with big dollars in order to get that trip to America. And so how do they get it? Well, a relative, a loan, put your land up as collateral, whatever you do. So there's a good chance those people being deported have a registered debt in Honduras. So they're making money and seeing to it that those who make money get to make it, whether they're forced to leave or whether they're coming back. So it's, again, it's a little bit of a circus.
I have this video, let me see, I guess I didn't check the sound. Is there sound? Not sure. Let me try, it's really short, if it doesn't go through then. At least you can read it. This was just the river, as I mentioned, we were there with the blessing. What you're not hearing is the voice of one of the leaders, and this is just the translation. So it's their message to the U.S. government. In the Saguan region, we are in a moment of great pain, psychological trauma. We are being victimized for defending our life, water, and the mountains. So it was just a powerful statement. So the third group stayed in San Pedro Sula, which, if you're reading the news, always kind of says the murder capital of the world. They met with a lot of local community groups and NGOs that were working with the people. One group they met was a forum of 16 organizations for women. Femicide is a big issue in Honduras. Of the rates of deaths, killings of women is huge, is really horrific. So they met with women where there was efforts to do a lot of self-empowerment and really advocating for women and their voices and their rights. They also met with a local community, Pueblo San Isidro, which is nestled up. This is what the community looks like. It's a very impoverished community living right next to a condominium, which has their eyes on this land for a parking lot. So this is about 250 families have been living here for 10 years, and they've been trying to organize against the destruction and displacement of their families. And most of the people they met with had family members who had already left for the U.S., but those that were there were still really struggling and fighting to stay. And so the last place we kind of converged on was Tegucigalpa, which was the capital. The night before we arrived, our delegation didn't make it to this, but they had our group within the delegation, they had a vigil in front of the U.S. Embassy, and they really wanted us to draw attention to the U.S. Embassy as the symbol of the U.S. government. in Honduras, so they had this vigil, and you can sort of see the riot police that was there. Nothing happened, luckily, and they really feel like the presence of the U.S. and international presence quiets things down. So they have this vigil, and then we got a meeting with the charge d'affaires. So there's no U.S. ambassador right now in Honduras. It's just this woman, Heidi Fulton, who's in charge of the embassy. The charge d'affaires, I guess, is the title. So our intention was to bring members of the Guapino community, the ones that were facing this mining company that were facing criminalization. And so when we emailed her office to say, we have a delegation of 75, we want to meet with you, we're bringing these two community members, her response was we welcome your delegation, we're happy to meet with you, but those two people are not allowed because they don't have proper background clearance. So we really pushed back and said, well, if they can't come in the embassy, can you meet us on the outside because they're a part of our group? We'll meet you there, you can talk to them there. And after some back and forth, she said, okay, fine, we'll allow them this time. So this is Juan and Juana right here, who were able to basically meet her face to face to tell their story. And we knew that the stories that she had been hearing from the government were just casting them as criminals, right? So it was a really powerful thing to witness, of just them being able to share their message directly with her, and she listened. You know, the line that we got from her then, and it's sort of what you hear on Twitter and that sort of thing, is we are in relationship with the Honduran government. You know, we understand there's human rights abuses, but we've also seen some benefits of the aid we provide. I don't know, some of us were like, was that even worth visiting her? Because she just didn't really have much for us. But I think it was powerful to see them be able to speak to her directly. And then we held a press conference outside the embassy immediately after that. This was something that they also really wanted us to do, was do press conferences everywhere. Since they said that when it's just the local community groups doing press conferences, a lot of media just doesn't come. But whenever we held one, they would come. And so this was really an opportunity to elevate the stories of Juan Lopez and some of the other community members and get national press paying attention to that. So this is just another video, and I'll just read it. This is Juan Lopez, and this was his message. Oh shoot. So he is one of the Guapino community members acquitted for standing up for water, and this is what his message. Thank you very much from the Aguan, from the people of the Aguan River Valley. We express a deep sense of gratitude to the people of the United States, represented in the delegation that is accompanying us on this day, and this was a picture of our video of our group. In like manner, we express before the government of the United States our discomfort with and our protest of their propping up in Honduras an institutional structure of state. Of government that wounds the basic rights of the citizenry, injures the basic conditions for peace, for truth, for justice, and for love. So we're hoping Juan Lopez will also be here in the fall. The organization, the community organization he is the head of, was nominated for an International Human Rights Award, which they received. So there's a reception in October that we're hoping will be enough to get him over here to do the tour, the fall speaking tour. So this is just a picture of our, the executive director of the organization I work with, Reverend Deborah Lee, getting a lot of media coverage, which was really, really important. So as my dad mentioned, I just wanted to say a little bit about what's currently happening. There's been massive protests in Tegucigalpa against the privatization of healthcare and education. The majority of the protests have been peaceful, but they've also been met with state-sanctioned violence and with the extreme police force. There was an incident where some perpetrator got to the steps of the embassy and lit some tires on fire. So that was sort of broadcasted a lot to make it look like it was these protesters are just all terrible, violent people, but we all think it's very suspicious how he got to be so close to the stairs of the U.S. Embassy and do that act. And you'll see that sign a lot, the hashtag Fuera Ho, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's the current president, so it's like get out, Ho, Fuera Ho. A lot of the marches we were on with them, that's what the chant, that was the rallying cry. I don't know if you've also seen a lot of controversy about him. His brother is sitting in one of our prisons for narco trafficking. Yeah, and there's actually, I have a link to an article that will pass on to you all about him. So this is happening, and the charge, this is the picture of Heidi Foltz in the charge d'affaires. So she's tweeting these statements from the U.S. Embassy that says things like this: the U.S. Embassy calls on Honduras to abstain from acts of violence. We emphasize the need to resolve our differences peacefully with respect for public order. We have to work together to realize a democratic future. So then our partner Juan Lopez put out his statement. And one of his statements in response to the embassy was, the U.S. invites us to strengthen democracy, believes in a promising future and in the need for dialogue. And he says, oh, I like that. However, the message hides the truth. Who supported the coup in 2009? Who provides weapons, equipment, money, and military advice to the regime? The pacifying message of the embassy is unacceptable. We are not a violent people. We are not an inferior people. We demand relations of respect and equality. So hopefully she saw his response. So one of our tasks in returning is from this powerful trip was to continue to share what we saw as these root causes of migration, why people are leaving. And in what we did witness and in conversation with our community partners, it's so important we continue to think about the influence of the U.S. politically, economically, militarily. And that we really wanted to lift up these four kind of central causes around the government, that's for and by the elite. They kept talking about the 12 elite family in Honduras that have a lot of wealth and power. The military and the militarized police, transnational corporations and banks and the power that they have, and this extractive economic model, the mining, the tourism, the monocrop culture continues to exist. And because of this, you see this ongoing cycle of violence, of inequality, of corruption and impunity, and the impact on the people that are fleeing, and the Hondurans that are staying, is the organized crime that are allowed to exist, the war on the poor that continues, people being displaced from their land, and just the ongoing human rights abuse. And one of the quotes from Padre Mello when he talks about the caravans is he says, it's the alliances between oligarchic business and political elites in transnational capital that's backed by the U.S. Embassy, the armed forces, and people from organized crime that create the caravans. So the other thing, in addition to kind of witnessing the root causes of migration, we were also really blessed and inspired to see the community, the resistance in all these communities that we were visiting. The love that they had for each other, for the land, which is why they were fighting so hard. Their commitment to nonviolent resistance was very apparent in all the communities we met with. Their song, their Guapinol, I wish I should have brought that. The Guapinol community has a song about Guapinol and why it's so powerful. So the whole community starts singing this song. They also were very intentional about honoring their ancestors, honoring those who have been killed, disappeared. Everywhere we went, they would set up an altar as a way to sort of gather and center our time with them. And the commitment of Radio Progreso, I mean, they are out there broadcasting these stories. Without them, these stories would not be heard nationally. So they are targeted. Their equipment is constantly getting vandalized. You know, their staff do not feel safe roaming around the cities alone. But they're very committed to continuing to do this work. And the protesting in the streets, despite the risk they faced with state-sanctioned violence, they were in the streets, and they really had us joining them in the streets. And their faith. So part of while we were there was an honoring of Monsignor Archbishop Romero, who was canonized a few months prior, maybe 6 months ago. So we were part of a theological forum where they really honored his contribution to Honduras, and they just continued to sort of lift him up as this, as a saint that he was, and his message of peace. So I wanted to just sort of end this part with just the vision that we are putting forth on migration and immigration. Our vision is that we envision a world where migration is not forced. We envision a world where migration across borders is understood, compassionately received, and not criminalized. We defend migration as a choice for self-determination and a life free from violence and insecurity, which guarantees of health, employment, and respect for human rights. And as people of faith, we must bear responsibility for our role in the root causes, driving forced migration, and support those for whom it is too late. So now, the ways we can act, which my dad kind of already went through, in this moment, we are asking folks to contact their members of Congress about the current state repression of protesters, and there's flyers and the postcards talk about that. We're also pushing on our congressional members to pass the Berta Cáceres Human Rights Act, which I'll talk a little bit about. We're trying to raise funds for this fall tour and looking for hosts. So if you all want to host folks from Honduras, we would love to partner with you. And there's also some legislation that's really looking at stopping U.S. arms sales. So the Berta Cáceres, as most folks know, Berta Cáceres in 2015, well, she's an indigenous Honduran from the Lenca community that's been a leader in environmental advocacy and justice for many years, and so she was awarded the 2015 Goldman Prize here in the U.S. for her leadership in defending the environment. The following year, she was shot outside of her home. There's been like 7 individuals that have been arrested linked to this, but people believe that is not the true mastermind, that they think it's really this the mining company that her community was fighting against is behind it. So justice has not been served for Berta. So there is a bill, and this has been introduced before that hasn't been passed, but was reintroduced this past March, the Berta Cáceres Human Rights Act, which would suspend U.S. security aid to the police and military until human rights conditions are met. It also instructs the U.S. to vote no on loans. And actually, I think this might be, now that I look at it, it's development banks that are even for other kinds of development, because we've been told by our community partners that they don't want any more U.S. aid until human rights conditions are met, because they don't believe that money is really getting to the people. So they've been pushing us to really enforce that part. So it's not just about the security, it's also just development money. So here in Minnesota, your 2 reps have co-sponsored the Berta Cáceres Act already. So it'd be great to thank them and encourage them to be champions of this legislation. These are other members of the Minnesota House who haven't signed on yet. That it'd be great if, and there's postcards for just about everyone back there maybe, I think. And then there isn't a Senate version yet of the bill that we know of, unless anyone here has heard. So encouraging your senators to introduce the Senate version of the Berta Cáceres Act is also something that we're encouraging people to do. And then there's two other bills that are addressing U.S. weapon sales in general, so it's not specific to Honduras. I don't know as much about this, but I've heard these are also things that we're really pushing for. This picture is a tear gas canister that when we were meeting with Radio Progreso staff, they said the last election, after people were pouring into the streets and protesting nonviolently, they were all tear gassed. And they collected them, so they had a whole bag full. And if you can, I don't know if you can see it, but it says, made in Homer City, Pennsylvania, USA. So we don't even hide the weapons that we're passing on to Honduras, and they had a whole bag for us. And in fact, one of the delegates brought one to the embassy and gave it to the charge d'affaires. She poured some water from the Guapinol River and said, here's a gift for you. So the fall speaking tour, as I mentioned, we're hoping September, October, that we'll bring Padre Mello and Juan Lopez and others on. We would love for them to go to 10 to 12 cities across the U.S., including the Bay Area and D.C. And we're wondering if there would be enough interest and capacity for the Twin Cities to host probably like 2 or 3. I think we would split them up. So if folks are interested in that, if you think you could have a group of planners that could gather, we would love to partner with you on that fall tour. And then the last thing, we're just making a pitch for donations. Now more than ever, we really need Radio Progressive actives because they can really amplify the stories and the voices of people, and they've had their equipment damaged, so they're doing a fund drive. We're also raising money for the fall tour. And donations from Minnesota by August 1st will be matched up to $1,000. So anything you give now will be doubled. And you could, I have an envelope here, maybe we can just pass it around if folks want to give cash, or there's also a website that we can share. And that's it. I'll just say I would love to take questions and just dialogue with folks. I do have a sign-in sheet if you want to get our root causes emails. You can put your email on there. I'll just add you to our listserv. But I would love to open it up for questions and dialogue. Yes.
I was wondering about the mining company. What are they mining? Is it like copper, or what is it they're mining, and what's the name of the mining company?
There's several. The one in Guapinol, I think they're mining, we were told, iron ore. It's a Piñatas mining company. I have more details that I can share with you. It's actually a Honduran based, owned by one of the elite families. But that's another thing.
But
that
then
we've
where's it
sort of-
going to go? It's probably going to be shipped to the United States or something, the AR, or
I'm not sure.
Israel?
There's a lot of different natural resources that are being mined all over the country, but I think in that particular community it's iron ore. And then we also were learning that company is a Honduran company, but there's a Canadian company and another community. There's a lot of transnational mining companies.
Well, I wanted to sort of share a couple of experiences when I was there that were so similar to this. This is 40-some years ago, before I was aware of just about anything. But I was sent to, I joined up in some do-gooder group, some church group thing. And so we were stationed in La Ceiba. And a couple of things that I found out when I was there. First of all, they asked us to come down, and we were supposed to bring, they gave us a list of what to bring, and we had now I was going to be with little children, and it was overhead projectors and computer parts. They had a lot of these kind of things that I never use up here for little children. So I brought colored crayons and papers and clay and all that kind of stuff. And I realized when we got down there, the military confiscated this other stuff that I was supposed to bring down, overhead projectors and all of those fancy things. So that was given to the military, then they were going to distribute it. But my stuff was never confiscated. So I was really glad we got to use ours in the classroom, where we were. But they told us a lot of lies, and one big lie was that the military was making roads into they chased the people of the U.S. military, chased the people from La Ceiba, which is a coastal town, and promised them if they go back into the woods practically, they would get free TVs and free all this electrical stuff, and it sounded real good. Of course, there's no place to plug them in, but, you know, all this electrical stuff. So they persuaded a lot of Hondurans to go back into the woods, you know. And then, of course, we took over the coastal regions for the military to arrive. And we weren't catching on to this until, you know, quite a bit later. And they said they were making roads to bring the produce back into these people that they had sent back into the woods. They were bringing produce to them, you know. And here we found out that they were military strips. They were airplane strips for our airplanes to bring military equipment in. And, you know, you didn't find out this stuff yet. First, you almost believed it, you know, but then when the people that we were living with and working with were the peasants, you know, the on a whim, you know, and they were telling us what really was happening. So it was really my first awareness of the lies that go on with our foreign policy. It was a real eye-opener to the foreign policy that we thought our country was so nice. And then when I got home, that was the worst part, was when I came home, it was during Ronnie Reagan's time, and he was bragging about what we're doing in Honduras. Mm-hmm. And I almost kicked the television because I knew that he was lying. Right. I had seen it. So it was just that contrast of coming home and hearing the lies that really hurt, because you knew that was just the opposite. So it was quite an experience. I just could identify with the lies particularly that made you so disgusted.
Yes, my name is Marcial Castro. I'm part of the Honduras Honduras group here in Twin Cities. And then I have one question and one observation. The first question is, what did you experience there with, what you know about the LGBT community facing repression there, as well as on the caravan?
Yeah.
That is one, because I say that because we are working with another group that we have organized here, the Minnesota Caravan Group.
Yeah.
And then we have been working with families too, you know.
Yeah.
There will be an event here for the Pride in Minnesota, and then we're trying to organize some kind of highlight the situation of this particular community. And then we have a couple of people from Honduras, which we would like to talk with you at the end of this. She's gonna announce, Charlene, about the flyer that we have for that event, that people can take one flyer. That is one thing. What do you know about that specific cases? As you know, there have been some death in the immigration jail here and the border, and also regular families have been dying there, you know, members of regular family. And the other thing is, I want to say that last night you were talking about stop the military aid there and that Berta Cáceres Act. Last night there was a convoy coming from, we don't know, a military convoy coming from outside, coming in big trucks. A lot of equipment was arriving to Puerto Cortes, going to inside the country, you know. And this is because the 40-day general strike and the situation is the medical and the teachers doing there in collaboration with other groups. And then what happened is the government is feeling like it's surrounded, you know, for all this situation, and they are bringing Israeli troops. And this situation, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's a lot of equipment that I posted a video in the Honduras page where you can see a lot of trucks running with heavy equipment, military equipment, and a lot of police guarding those things. I just say that, but the question too.
Yes, thank you. So the LGBTQ community, I know in the Bay Area, the Bay Area is a destination for a lot of folks because of, as I mentioned, our court system and a lot of services for LGBTQ. So we do have some trans women who were on the recent trans caravan that are in our community now that have been wonderful to partner with, because we've been wanting to raise up their story. And one in particular, Charlotte, who's from Honduras, was one of the leaders in one of the trans caravans. She was with the young Roxana, the young woman that was killed, or died in ice, in their hands. And so she's been doing a lot of speaking, and we've actually had her join our root causes presentation so she could share her experience and the experience of trans women. And another group that we've worked with, Santa Fe Dreamers, they've been helping because there's only one ICE detention center that will house trans women in New Mexico. So they do have a place for them, but when that fills up, then they're put in different places in solitary confinement. So there's been a huge push to find sponsors to get them out as more quickly, as a highly vulnerable part of the caravan is the trans women in particular. So that's been a big ask, is to try to find folks who will actually sponsor them, which means you'll house them and feed them for 6 months to a year while they're applying for asylum. But I'd be happy to put you in touch with the local trans women leaders of the caravan that we're in touch with. And it's great to hear that you're doing an event here. A part of Pride, the Twin Cities Pride work that's happening, is that what you're gonna, do you have anyone from the caravan, the trans caravan, that landed here? No, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to connect you right now.
Yeah. What we're gonna be doing is not having a specific event, but we're gonna be talking to people at the Pride Festival, just raising awareness about the caravans and the conditions in Central America, especially for LGBT communities. And what we're asking just every community member that attends Pride Festival is to think about sponsoring an asylum seeker and to support financially some of the institutions who are doing legal defense for asylum seekers. So thank you for bringing that up. And we don't know any, well, I did meet a trans woman Honduran here, but I don't have any connection with her.
Okay.
So, but we're just raising, in general, awareness about the dangers of the caravan, why people are coming, and just, because it's Pride Weekend, highlighting that this community is also affected.
Do you want to talk about what group you're from?
Sure. A few of us are here from Hands Off Honduras, and we're spearheading this initiative through the Minnesota Caravan Solidarity Group, which is just a coalition of a bunch of groups who really care about a lot of the issues that are affecting the migrants. Militarization of the border, detention centers, asylum law that is being ignored, etc.
Yeah.
So,
That's great news. Do you think I'm just curious, would there be interest to host via site for the Honduran fall tour? Does anyone want to raise their hand to be in a planning? We're just wondering if there's a core group of folks who would be willing to join a planning team, then we would work with you. Show of hands. Yay, that would be fantastic. Okay, so make sure you put your name on the sign-in and then maybe write that on the side that I can connect with you. Yes.
I have a question about the weapons that, like the guns and the weapons that come from the U.S. into Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador. From our manufacturing companies.
Yeah.
Even, because I'm assuming that the gangs they're using U.S. weapons. They make it across the border. It doesn't matter if there's going to be a wall or not. And is there anything where we can make a law that says that any U.S. these U.S. manufacturing weapons companies, if their product makes it in the hands of these gangs, and I don't know, something to
limit the weapons to getting in.
or even to highlight that, because I feel like if Americans knew that, there's such a disinformation campaign. If Americans knew that Chiquita and Dole basically took over, or the names of these mining companies, or the names of the U.S. chemical companies that are, sending, like that gas thing or whatever.
Yeah.
If they understood that, I think that's a start.
Yeah,
And they make it, I mean, the media, the corporate media makes it very hard to just,
yeah, to make those connections and to see
Right.
who are the actors. I can't speak directly to the weapons, but I do know a group that's doing a lot of research and advocacy on that, and they're the ones that, with those two bills I highlighted,
okay.
that I could totally connect you with. I have a fact sheet with more details about US weapons sales and stuff like that I would be happy to share with
Okay,
you.
that would be great.
But we would love to partner with groups that wanna help elevate those stories, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, because I do think that most Americans don't really know.
Right.
You know, there's been different efforts to stop buying Chiquita bananas, you know, that will sort of crop up. But I think for the most part, people don't realize where their bananas and pineapples are coming from.
Right. And it's amazing that they're so cheap, 22 cents
And
per
you have to
banana.
wonder why they're so
But
cheap.
it comes from tropical, or
Yeah.
even a pineapple in the store,
Yeah,
yet an apple that's grown, it's interesting.
yeah. Over here?
My question is, here, I haven't heard anything lately, in the last couple of years, about a migration from Nicaragua, which is right next door.
Right.
And I'm assuming it's got the same demographics.
Very different political situation in Nicaragua. I mean, I think, there's more recent, I really shouldn't speak, I'm no expert at all, but one of the persons in our delegation was from Nicaragua. So she was really looking at the differences. It's very different politically. Our relationship with that government and so it's very different.
Also,
And even in comparison, like Honduras compared to like Guatemala and El Salvador, they were still saying Honduras does have higher military spending. Like there's still, there's a lot of things that are going on in that region, but Honduras does have certain qualities that are making it be the majority of the CARAVAN members are from Honduras currently.
I heard on the trip, and I don't have the exact number, U.S. each year gives something on the order of $30 million to the military and security of Honduras, and something like $30 million for improving their society, so the people don't have to flee. What we heard on the trip is that the military money is used to repress the people's movements and to promote the corporations. As far as helping the people in society, no one could tell us any example, really, of how that money came down to help anybody. And I can tell you that the government there is suspected of having corruption in that kind of money.
When you were down there, did anybody mention the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund and their roles that they're playing? Because they're if you want to talk about really what's going on, that's the top of the food chain,
Right, that's why I think when this whole idea of stopping all development and aid, sometimes there's pushback from people who don't understand that. But our partners there were very clear that they didn't want any more aid from the World Bank and International Development Bank,
Well,
and
'cause
the
I'm
role
sure
that
they-
those transnational banks are playing.
Well, it's the
It's
same
very
story.
destructive.
This is the same story. Because they're sitting there saying they got to privatize the country
Right.
because they have loans and debts that they can't pay back. But the same thing happened in Bolivia in the 90s, and the same thing in Mexico now. And in the 80s, and it's like the same script.
Right.
Nothing's changed.
Right.
People talk about weapons sales. Look at Syria.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, all right. Well.
Yes. That's why I think it's also important that when we're talking about these issues in Honduras, we are seeing the links with other countries. Like the Israeli flag, we're like, oh, that's interesting.
That's obvious. It's not. It doesn't get any more blatant than that. Because I'm sure there's an Israeli defense contractor selling them guns and saying it's all right.
Yep.
Really, they should be trying to pass a law. They should be trying to pass a law to nationalize the Federal Reserve. Because that's they're the main culprits. They're the reason why you have the World Bank and IMF doing the actions, because the representatives for the U.S. on those multilateral banks are appointed by the Federal Reserve, and of course the executive branch won't do anything about it. I mean, I think that should be the real bill, that if anybody wants to sponsor a bill, it should be talked about.
Good idea.
Yeah, my name is Ken Gilchrist. I'm also a member of Hands Off Honduras. There are, I think, 5 or 6 members here from our group. We work on Honduran issues. And I think I can speak for the group that I think we would be really excited to work with you folks when you sponsor your October tour. And the other thing that I'd like to give some information on, when you were talking about the recent protests in Honduras and somebody burning tires out in front of the American embassy, and how that this seemed to be a big issue. Interestingly enough, I happened to be on a delegation that was sponsored by the Cross Border Network out of Kansas City, and there were 3 or 4 activists also from the Bay Area. We went around Honduras and met with Garifano leaders and met with the schools in some of the gang infested areas, and had a lot of important messages. So we decided that we wanted to go to the U.S. Embassy and share what we had learned, and we were there on June 1st when all these protests were taking place in response to the privatization of the education and healthcare systems. And we were there when this individual burned the tires out in front of the embassy. And the sirens went off inside the embassy, and everyone was saying it was, you know, get duck and cover, get down. We were talking with the charge d'affaires at the time, and he had to absent himself. And so everybody was really freaking out. When we left, it was clear to us that there was nothing really to be frightened by. And we subsequently did get information. Our leaders found out that there's a lot of evidence that the burning of the tires was staged. That the protesters came down, and these tires were there, and some 23-year-old kid who's the son of school teachers was immediately arrested, and he was put in the horror chamber, La Tova prison, where maximum security prison based upon a U.S. model, and lots of gangs people in there, and they pretty much control some of the cell blocks. But they also put in there political prisoners. And we went to the prison and we met with some of the political prisoners. Some of you may know or heard of Edwin Espinal, who's been organizing in resistance since the coup. He's in there, he's been there for 18 months with another gentleman, and they were arrested for alleged arson. And they haven't even, been tried yet, and they can't get out. And there's a lot of threats against them by the gangs. And when we visited the prison, it's really eerie because all the guards, to protect their identities, wear these masks from their throats to the top of their head. You can only see the slits of their eyes. And I guess the third point that I would make is that the wife of Edwin Espinal is Karen Spring, who is an outstanding Canadian activist who has been working on these issues since 2009. She was the guide to our group, and I learned an incredible amount because of the delegation and because of her leadership. And we have been in communication with her, and she has indicated that she's willing to come to the Twin Cities on July 15th and July 16th, and we're going to sponsor an event. And maybe here, we're also reaching out to the Mayflower Church. There may be some interest there. I'm hoping that folks here from St. Joan of Arc will hopefully work with us, to make this an event where we can turn out a lot of people and learn an awful lot from Karen Spring. And the final thing I would point out is that we do have a Facebook, and you can go to Minnesota Hands Off Honduras, and you can keep in touch with what we're doing, but also with all kinds of information that's being posted about what's going on in Honduras. So let me say, I think we all really enjoyed your presentation, and you're doing exciting work, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
I have a plug, if I may. I'm with MIRA, Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee. And many groups have partnered to march and protest June 30th. And there are flyers on the back table. This is a year ago, there was a big protest about stop separating families. And nothing has changed. So join us in the street if that's something that interests you. The more people, the better.
Well, thank you all for having, right, maybe right over here first.
Oh, you had a question too.
Yeah, that's all right.
Well, since Trump has demanded that the Mexican government stop people at their southern border, I'm wondering how that's affecting the whole picture.
Yeah.
Or what Mexicans are doing.
Yeah, we don't know yet. I mean, we are anticipating, I'm not sure what we're actually anticipating with what's been going on with Mexico. I mean, we're seeing how the criminalization of humanitarian aid workers and accompaniers in Mexico is happening. Like we heard of the case in Arizona, of the humanitarian aid worker that was charged with, what was the actual charge?
Leaving water.
When he was leaving water for people in the desert. It was a felony charge, really. And the same thing happened with a few folks from another organization called Pueblos Sin Fronteras that actually are in Mexico to try to support the caravanners. They were arrested and charged with human trafficking. And that was by the Mexican government. So we're sort of waiting, and we're just anticipating more of that's going to happen. That Mexico is going to try to sort of flex some of their power in response to what Trump is pressuring them to do. So we'll see, how it's going to really impact the caravanners. Right back here, and then.
I just want to say I'm Kristen Dooley. I'm the director of Women Against Military Madness. When Gary told us that Gala was going to be here, we were excited because we haven't had the opportunity to learn about Honduras so intimately. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your presentation. We've raised almost $200 to help. And please make a commitment to sign the postcards for your representatives. We'll send them out for you, but it's part of WHAM's method from the beginning is never a meeting without an action, and that's the action we want to take so that we have a real effect, not only in here, learning so much from you, but also take it out and get our congresspeople to move. So I wanted to thank you all, and I'm not ending it because
I just wanted to say that this is being live streamed to the WHAM Facebook page, so it's there now. If you share it with people, they'll learn something too, hopefully.
Yay. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you. And I'll be around for another 20 minutes or so I'd love to keep meeting people.